The strongest chains are the ones you can't see, the ones someone wears so that you can walk free. But what happens when the price of your freedom is his life? Let us step inside the silence now. The box was on her doorstep at 7 minutes past 6 in the morning, and there was no snow in London that day, but there was frost on the lid. Hermione Granger stood in the doorway of her flat in her dressing gown, with her wand held loosely at her side, and looked down at it, and did not pick it up, and did not go back inside. The stairwell smelled of wet stone and the neighbour's coffee. Somewhere below, a door closed. The frost on the box was already melting into beads that ran down the plain brown cardboard and gathered at the corners. And she knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with 7 years of the same morning, exactly what was inside. She crouched. She ran her wand over it in the 4 detection passes the ministry had drilled into her, and the box returned nothing. No trace, no residue, no signature of the hand that had left it, not even the faint smudge of intent that clings to any object a person has carried with purpose. It was the cleanest piece of magic she had ever failed to read, and she had been failing to read it since she was 15 years old. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of undyed linen, lay a single white hellebore. The winter rose. Its petals were the colour of the inside of a shell, faintly green at the throat, and the stem had been cut that morning. She could tell because the cut end was still wet, still weeping its clear sap. And hellebore in September did not exist in Britain outside of glass houses, tended by someone who had gone to a great deal of trouble. No card. There had never been a card. Hermione carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table beside the other 7. She had kept them all. That was the part she had never told Ginny, never told Harry, never told the mind healer at St. Mungo's, who had asked gently whether there were any rituals she found herself unable to break. 7 boxes in a row along the deep windowsill, each with its flower inside it, and each flower as fresh as the day it had come. Not preserved, not charmed against decay, simply not dying, which was a thing hellebores did not do, and a thing she had stopped trying to explain to herself around the 4th year. She sat down. The kettle worked itself up to a shriek, and she let it. 22 years old today, and she had woken up alone in a flat she could afford because of a house she still could not explain, with a curse scar on her forearm that had stopped hurting for reasons the healers called spontaneous remission, and she called something else entirely, and 8 white flowers on a windowsill, and no idea, none, who in the world was watching her closely enough to know that she liked the ones that bloomed in the cold. "Someone loves you," Ginny had said once, laughing, throwing herself across the sofa with her boots on the cushions. "That's all it is. Some poor sod's been carrying a torch for you since school and hasn't the nerve to sign his name." Honestly, Hermione, it's romantic. Stop looking at it like a crime scene. But Ginny had only ever seen the flowers. Ginny had not seen the letter from St. Mungo's curse damage ward 3 years ago, when the scar Bellatrix had left in her arm had begun to spread its silver roots up toward her elbow, and the treatment was 400 galleons a session for a course of 11, and Hermione had sat on the floor of this kitchen doing arithmetic that would not come out, and had gone to bed sick with it, and had woken to an owl bearing a statement of account with a single line stamped across it in red. Settled in full. No donor, no name. The healer had been apologetic and vague, and had eventually admitted, under the particular pressure Hermione knew how to apply, that the payment had come through Gringotts from a vault whose holder had purchased an anonymity charm of the oldest and most expensive kind, and that the goblins had been very clear. The account would not be discussed, not for a court order, not for the minister himself. Ginny had not seen the deed either. The house in Hampstead, where Hermione had grown up, where her parents had lived before she took their memories and their faces and their whole daughter out of their heads and sent them to the other side of the world. The house she had come back to at 19 to find condemned, the street bought up by a developer, a demolition order pinned to the door of the only building on earth that still had her childhood in its walls. She had spent 2 months and every contact she possessed fighting it. She had lost. And then, 11 days before the wrecking crew was due, the order had been withdrawn because the property had been purchased outright by a buyer who had never taken possession, never rented it out, never so much as changed the locks, and who had, according to the solicitor, given exactly one instruction. It is not to be touched. It is to be maintained. If Miss Granger ever asks after it, she is to be told it is safe. Hermione had asked. She had been told it was safe. And when she demanded a name, the solicitor had gone grey around the mouth and said that he was contractually and magically incapable of providing one, and that he had, in 20 years of practice, never seen an anonymity clause so thoroughly and expensively built. And Ginny had certainly not seen what happened at the Dolohov raid in March. Hermione still did not have language for that one. She had the Aura report, which said Granger's shield held under sustained fire, and she had her own memory, which said something different. She had been in a cellar in Wapping with 2 dead men on the stairs, and her wand arm broken in 3 places, and she had thrown up a protego with her left hand and felt it fail, felt the charm come apart in the air like wet paper, and she had known, in the clean, flat way one knows such things, that she was going to die on that floor. And then the shield had not failed. It had reformed itself around her out of nothing at all, out of no wand and no voice and no caster, and it had held for 11 minutes against curses that should have shredded it. And when the second team came through the door, they found her sitting inside a dome of silver light with her broken arm in her lap, laughing, because there was nothing else to do. The ministry's official finding had been residual defensive magic of unknown provenance, which was ministry for "we don't know, and we would rather you stopped asking." The kettle had boiled itself dry. Hermione got up and dealt with it, and stood at the window with her hands flat on the cold sill, looking at 8 white flowers in 8 brown boxes, and made herself say it out loud in the empty kitchen, because she had learned during the war that the things you refuse to say aloud are the things that eat you. It isn't an admirer. Her breath fogged the glass. Admirers send flowers. Admirers do not settle 4,000 galleon medical accounts through goblin-blind trusts. Admirers do not buy houses in Hampstead and refuse to hold the keys. Admirers do not hold a shield charm around you for 11 minutes from somewhere you cannot see. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her forefinger, hard, an old habit from an older war. Somebody has been keeping me alive for 7 years, and they have gone to more trouble to remain anonymous than most people go to remain married. And I have been telling myself a love story about it, because the alternative is that I am being managed. The word came out with more heat than she'd expected, and it left a taste in her mouth like a coin. Because that was the shape of it, wasn't it? That was the shape that had been sitting under the pretty story all these years, the shape she had refused to look at directly. Somewhere in the world was a person who knew the exact contours of her life, her scar, her house, her bank balance, the day she was born and the flowers she loved, and who had reached into that life again and again without ever once asking her permission. Who had decided, alone, what she needed and when she needed it, and had provided it, and had made himself unreachable so that she could not refuse. She had spent her entire adult life becoming a woman nobody could carry, and someone had been carrying her the whole time. At 7:30, she dressed for work in the grey robes of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and clipped her ministry badge to her collar, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment with the badge crooked. Her fingers went to it, straightened it, went back to it, and straightened it again, though it had been perfectly level the first time, and then a third time, and she made herself stop and put her hands down at her sides and breathe. She was not going to spend her 22nd birthday being frightened of a flower. She was going to find him. The thought settled into her with a click, like a key finding the shape of a lock, and everything in her that had spent 7 years being politely bewildered went quiet and cold and organized. She had the Gringotts refusal. She had the solicitor. She had the healer's account number and the date of the Wapping raid, and the fact, the enormous unexamined fact, that whatever had held that shield had been old magic, family magic, the kind that ran in blood and deeds and contracts, the kind that had gone out of common use 2 centuries ago and survived now only in the vaults of a dozen ancient houses who did not discuss their business with Muggle-born girls from Hampstead. There were not many people in Britain who could have done what had been done to her. There were, if she was honest, very few. Hermione took her coat from the hook and went out into the September morning, and did not know that, at that exact moment, in a narrow office 4 floors above the ministry's atrium, a man was sitting at a desk with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his left hand pressed flat against the wood to stop it shaking, staring at a calendar on which the 19th of September had been circled every year for 7 years in the same faded ink. The ministry lift disgorged her into the 4th floor corridor at 9:08, and she was already 3 steps toward her office when she saw the sign on the door opposite hers. The office that had stood empty since Perkins retired, with its brass plate blank for a year and a half. The plate was not blank anymore. It had been engraved that week. The letters still had that raw brightness that brass loses within a month. She stopped in the middle of the corridor with her bag half slipping off her shoulder and read it twice, and then a third time, because the first 2 readings had not gone anywhere useful. D. L. Malfoy, liaison, ancient houses and hereditary magic. The door opened before she could arrange her face. He was standing in the doorway with a stack of ledgers balanced against his hip and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. And the first thing Hermione noticed, before the hair, before the height, before the 7 years that had planed the boyish spite out of his face and left something harder and more tired in its place, was that his left forearm was bare. The mark was still there. Of course it was. But it had faded to the colour of an old bruise under the skin, grey-green and blurred at the edges, like ink left too long in water, and he had not covered it. He had rolled his sleeves up in a ministry corridor where anyone might walk past, and he had done it deliberately, the way a man sets a thing on a table and dares the room to comment. "Granger!" He said it the way one acknowledges weather. "They've put you across the hall. I did wonder." "Malfoy." Her voice came out steadier than she'd earned. "You work here." "I appear to." He shifted the ledgers. 6 weeks now. The Wizengamot decided that if the old houses were going to keep filing hereditary claims, nobody in this building can read. They'd better hire someone raised on the grammar. I'm the compromise nobody wanted and everybody voted for. A dry flicker at the corner of his mouth, gone before it could commit to being a smile. "You've been in Cairo. That's why you haven't seen me. The Hippogriff Treaty. 6 weeks of it, I'm told, and you came back with an addendum they're calling unprecedented." She had been in Cairo. She had not told him she'd been in Cairo. It was on the departmental board, admittedly, pinned up for anyone to read, and there was nothing in the least remarkable about a colleague knowing where a colleague had been. And yet, something in the smooth completeness of it snagged at her, a splinter under the thumbnail, the sense of a person who had read the board more carefully than the board deserved. "Ancient houses and hereditary magic," she said, reading the plate again. "That's a real department, is it? Not just a chair they found for you." "It's a real department with 1 chair in it." He stepped back from the door, which was either courtesy or dismissal. She could not tell which, and suspected he preferred it that way. Blood oaths, entailments, custodial rights, marriage contracts, the 12 varieties of debt magic the ministry outlawed in 1804 and then quietly stopped enforcing in 1806. When some grandmother in Wiltshire dies and her estate turns out to be bound by an 11th century covenant, nobody's read since the Restoration, I'm the one they send for. It's dull, it's badly paid, and it's the only work in Britain I'm qualified for that doesn't involve standing behind a shop counter while people decide whether to spit. He said the last part without any bid for sympathy at all. Flat, factual, the way one reports a rate of exchange. And Hermione found she had no ready answer to it. She had prepared over the years for a Malfoy who whined and a Malfoy who sneered. This one simply stated the terms of his life and waited to see whether she intended to make anything of them. "Marriage contracts," she said slowly, "among other things. And debt magic. Granger, if you've a question, ask it. You're doing the thing with your face where you're building a staircase, and I'm meant to wait at the bottom." And there it was, the second splinter. Because she did do that with her face, apparently, and Ginny had told her so exactly once, 4 years ago, in a pub, laughing. "No question," Hermione said. "Not yet." He held her eyes a moment longer than the exchange warranted. Then he inclined his head, and the door closed, and she stood in the corridor with the smell of new brass in her nose and her badge crooked on her collar. And she reached up to straighten it, and straightened it again, and made herself walk away before she could straighten it a third time. She did not go to her office. She went to Gringotts. The bank at 9:30 on a Tuesday was a cathedral of small, precise noises: quills, coin, the dry click of an abacus down the long marble hall. And Hermione took her place in the queue for the records desk, with the healer's statement folded in her coat pocket and her argument arranged in her head like a set of surgical instruments. She had done this once before, 3 years ago, and had been refused. She had been 19 then, and angry, and had made the mistake of demanding. Today, she asked. "I don't want the holder's name," she said, when the goblin behind the grill had finished looking at her the way goblins look at everyone. "I understand the anonymity charm. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I can break it. What I want is the class of vault." The goblin's quill stopped. "There are only so many kinds," Hermione went on, keeping her voice low and even. "A commercial account, a private holding, a trust, and a hereditary vault under a house charter, which pays out under its own rules and answers to its own instruments." She laid the statement on the counter and turned it around. "I'm not asking who paid this. I'm asking what paid it. That isn't protected. I've read the Charter of 1698 and the amendments, and vault classification has never been covered by an anonymity purchase, because classification isn't identity, it's category." The silence behind the grill went on for a long moment. "You have read the amendments," the goblin said at last, in a tone that was not quite disapproval. "Twice." He drew the statement toward himself with one long finger. He did not look at it. He looked at her for the length of 3 heartbeats, with an expression she could not have named under torture. Then he made a mark in his ledger and turned the statement back around, and beside the red settled in full stamp, there was now a small neat sigil in green ink, a bracket enclosing 3 vertical strokes. "Class 3, he said. "Hereditary charter, ancient and noble designation." A pause. "Disbursement authorized under a standing instrument, not a discretionary transfer." Hermione's mouth had gone dry. A standing instrument. "The vault did not choose to pay, Miss Granger. The vault was obliged to pay." He closed the ledger. "That is the whole of what classification tells you, and it is more than most receive. Good morning." She stood on the steps of Gringotts in the September wind for a long time after that, with her coat unbuttoned and the statement crushed in her fist, and let the sentence turn over and over in her. The vault was obliged to pay, not generosity, not a gift, not some lovesick fool emptying his savings for a girl who'd never noticed him. Something had compelled an ancient family's money to move on her behalf. Some instrument, some clause, some document sitting in a vault with her name written into it, working away quietly in the dark for 7 years, like a machine nobody had switched off. A person could stop giving gifts. A person could lose interest, run out of money, fall in love with someone else, die. Whatever this was, it did not depend on a person continuing to want to. It ran on its own terms. It had held a shield around her in a whopping cellar when no one was there. It had bought a house and refused the keys. Standing instrument. She knew, distantly, sickeningly, what standing instruments looked like. She had read about them in her 3rd year at school and never once imagined the word would arrive in her own life. Betrothal bonds, wardships, blood debts, custodial covenants, the whole ugly, beautiful architecture of old family magic, in which people were not asked but entered, in which a thing done to you at 15 went on being done to you at 22, whether you had ever heard of it or not. And there was precisely one person in the British Ministry of Magic whose entire job was reading those documents, whose office was directly across the hall from hers, who had started 6 weeks ago. Hermione went back to the ministry with her heart going hard and flat behind her ribs, and she did not knock on his door. She went to her own desk and pulled a sheet of parchment toward her and wrote out everything she had in columns in the small, ruthless hand she used when she was frightened. Dates, sums, the Hampstead solicitor's peculiar phrasing, the 11 minutes in Wapping, the flower that would not die. And when the columns were built, she sat back and looked at them and saw that she had, without deciding to, left a wide margin down the right-hand side of the page, as though some part of her had already reserved a column for a name and had not yet found the nerve to write one in it. She was still looking at it when the knock came at 6:20. He had his coat on, and the ledgers were gone, and his sleeves were down now, buttoned at the wrist, which she noticed and disliked herself for noticing. "You've missed 3 meals, and it's dark," Draco said. The tea trolley stopped at 4. "I'm going to the Leaky, because my flat has nothing in it but a lemon, and it seemed impolite to walk past a colleague who's been staring at the same piece of parchment since 2:30. How do you know how long I've—" "Your door's been open. My door faces it. I have eyes, Granger, and no work worth doing." He leaned against the frame, and for the first time she saw the tiredness properly. Not the fashionable pallor of a Malfoy, but something deeper and greyer that had settled under his eyes and stayed. "You can say no. I'd like it noted that I'm asking about food and nothing else, so that you don't have to spend the walk home working out what I want." "What do you want?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, and she watched it land. Watched his hand, resting on the doorframe, tighten fractionally, the knuckles going white against the wood, one small betrayal in an otherwise immaculate stillness, before he let it go and put the hand in his pocket out of sight. "An hour," he said, "in which nobody in the room thinks I'm about to do something. That's all. It's a remarkably difficult commodity to obtain in this building." A beat. "You went to Gringotts this morning." Everything in Hermione went very still. "I saw you leave," he said. "The lift was full, and you took the stairs, which people only do when they're in a hurry, or they don't want company, and you came back at 11 with your coat undone in a wind that would strip paint. I'm not spying on you. I'm bored and observant, and those two things together are a vice." He straightened off the doorframe. "Come and eat, or don't. But if you're going to spend the evening building a staircase, Granger, at least do it with soup." She looked at him, at the tiredness, at the buttoned cuffs, at the man whose job was the reading of instruments that oblige vaults to pay. And she thought, if it is you, then sitting across a table from you is the fastest way I will ever find out. "All right," she said, and reached for her coat. "But I'm choosing the table." The leaky at 7 was warm and low-ceilinged, and smelled of wood smoke and spilled ale, and she took the corner bench with her back to the wall and both doors in view, and he sat down opposite without comment, and the fact that he did not comment was itself a kind of comment. They ate. They argued about the hippogriff addendum, and then about the Wizengamot's filing procedures, and then, carefully, both of them stepping like people crossing riverstones, about the war, which neither of them named directly, and both of them walked all the way around. And at some point during the second hour, Hermione realized that she had stopped watching the doors. The realization arrived so quietly that she nearly missed it. She was laughing, actually laughing, at something dry he'd said about the minister's hat. And her back was to the wall, and her hands were loose around her cup, and she had not checked the room in 40 minutes, and she could not remember the last time that had happened in the presence of anyone at all, let alone this person, this one, whose aunt had cut her arm open on a drawing-room floor. The laughter went out of her all at once. He saw it. She watched him see it, watched the humour drain from his face, and something guarded rise behind it, and he set his glass down with a small, precise click. "There it is," he said quietly. "There, what is? The moment where you remember whose house it was." He turned the glass a half turn on the wood, not looking at her. "It happens to everyone. You've lasted longer than most. I've learned to wait for it, actually. It's less unpleasant when you're not hoping it won't come." "That isn't—" She stopped, because it was, partly, and lying to him seemed suddenly a worse offence than the truth. "That's not what I was thinking about." "No?" "I was thinking," Hermione said, and heard her own voice go thin and reckless, "that I've spent 7 years unable to sit with my back to a room, and I've just spent 40 minutes not looking at the door, and I don't understand why it's you that let me stop, and I want you to explain it to me." His hand went still on the glass. For the space of a long breath, he did not move at all. And then, slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers, and there was something in them so raw and so entirely unguarded that she felt her pulse jump in her throat, and his mouth opened on the shape of a word. Whatever the word had been, it did not survive the journey. She watched it die in his mouth. Watched the raw thing in his eyes withdraw the way a tide withdraws, quickly and without apology, leaving only the flat, wet sand of a face composed for company. And by the time he spoke, the voice that came out was pleasant and empty and belonged to a stranger. "Because I'm not frightening anymore," Draco said. "That's the whole of it. There's no danger in me left to watch for. You'd relax the same way in a room with a broken wand." It was a good answer. It was fast and plausible, and it explained nothing at all. And Hermione, who had spent 7 years learning to hear the shape of what people put in front of her to stop her looking further, recognized it instantly for what it was. Not a lie, but a door, closed politely in her face and locked from the other side. She let him have it. She was learning that with him, the way she had learned it with frightened creatures in her department. You do not chase a thing into its burrow. You sit down outside it and become part of the landscape until it comes out on its own. "That's rubbish," she said mildly, and drank her tea. "It's the truth." "It's a sentence. It isn't the truth. There's a difference, and you know it better than most, because you spend your days reading documents that are full of perfectly true sentences arranged to conceal an entire estate. She set the cup down. But I won't press you. Not tonight. Eat your soup, Malfoy. It's going cold, and you look like a man who's forgotten what food is for. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, mostly, at being let go. And beneath the surprise, something that looked almost like injury, as though being released had cost him more than being pursued would have. He picked up his spoon. He ate. And they finished the evening on safer ground, and when they parted at the Leakey's door into the September dark, he stood a moment on the step with his collar turned up and the lamplight yellow on his hair, and said, "Thank you for choosing the table. You noticed." "Granger, I noticed the first day. Corner seat, back to the wall, both doors." He pulled his gloves on, and there was that flicker at the corner of the mouth again, the one that never quite committed. "You aren't difficult to read. You're only difficult to read about. Good night." And he was gone into the dark before she could work out what he had meant by it. The weeks that followed did something to Hermione's life that she had not authorized and could not seem to stop. It began with the ledgers. His department had 1 chair, and hers had 4, and the Wizengamot, in its wisdom, had handed them a joint file in early October, a dissolved estate in the Welsh marches with a herd of half-feral thestrals attached to it by a covenant nobody could pass. And so his ledgers began appearing on her desk, and her files began appearing on his, and by the end of the month there was a small permanent stack of shared parchment on the corridor windowsill between their 2 doors that neither of them had proposed, and neither of them moved. They worked late. That was the thing she noticed first and understood last. The 4th floor emptied at 5:30, and by 6 the corridor had gone dark, except for 2 rectangles of light falling out of 2 open doors, and they would call things across the passage to each other without getting up. What's the Latin for the beast clause? It's not answering to my dictionary. It isn't Latin, Granger, it's dog Norman. Try avadavif and stop assuming everything old is Roman. And the hours would go, and at 9 or 10, one of them would look up and find the building silent around them. He was, she discovered with an irritation that curdled steadily into something else, extraordinarily good at his work. Not clever in the way she was clever. She gathered, ordered, cross-referenced, built her staircases. But something older and stranger, an instinct for the grammar of old magic that could not have been taught in any school. He would read a paragraph of 11th century covenant and say, "This is a lie," and be unable to explain how he knew, and be right. He would look at a family instrument and see not the words, but the shape of the intention behind them. "How?" she demanded one night in November, when he had found in 90 seconds a nested clause she had missed through 3 careful readings. "How did you see that?" "Because I know what it's for." He was sitting on the floor of her office with his back against the filing cabinet, and his tie loosened, which was a thing that had started happening around the beginning of the month, and which neither of them had acknowledged. You read it as a document. It isn't a document. It's a fence. Somebody in 1340 wanted to keep something in or somebody out, and every word of that clause is a post in the fence, and once you know that you stop reading for meaning and start walking the perimeter looking for the gate. He turned a page without looking at it. There's always a gate, Granger. Old magic can't build a thing without a way out of it. That's the one mercy in the whole miserable tradition. Whatever they bound, they had to leave a door, or the magic won't hold. It's in the bones of it. Hermione had gone very still. Always, she said. Always. It might be a door nobody can reach. It might need a key that was buried with somebody in 1512. But it exists. They have to leave one. And then he had looked up and seen her face, and something had gone careful behind his eyes, and he'd said lightly, "Why? Have you found a fence?" "No," she said. "I was only curious." It was the first time she had lied to him, and it sat in her chest all night like something swallowed wrong, because she had not stopped. That was the part she did not tell him and could not tell Ginny. The column with the wide margin was still on her desk under 3 other files, and it had grown. The goblin's green sigil, the phrase standing instrument, a list she had made of the 28 British families holding ancient and noble designation with a hereditary charter vault, and beside each one a note in her cramped hand, extinct in mail line 1981. Vault sealed by Wizengamot order. No possible connection. And one name near the bottom that she had written and then gone over so many times with her quill that the ink had bled through to the other side of the parchment. She had not crossed it out. She had not circled it either. She simply kept returning to it, night after night, the way one's tongue returns to a broken tooth. And every day she went to work and sat across the corridor from him. And every day it became harder to hold the 2 things in her head at once. The name on the parchment and the man on the floor of her office with his tie loosened, explaining Dog Norman. Because he was kind to her. That was the intolerable part. Not gallant, not attentive, nothing so easy to identify and refuse. Kind in ways so small and so precisely aimed that she only noticed them afterward, in the reconstruction, lying awake. The tea that appeared at her elbow at 4 o'clock without being asked for, always over-strong, the way she had drunk it since the war and had never mentioned to anyone. The way he had begun, wordlessly, to take the chair by the door in any room they shared, so that she could have the one facing it. The evening in December when the corridor's overhead lamps failed and the whole floor plunged into blackness, and she had been on her feet with her wand out before she could think, heart slamming, back to the wall. And he had not spoken from the dark, had not asked if she was all right, had simply lit his wand tip and held it low and steady at knee height, casting light on the floor and not in her eyes, and waited, silent, until her breathing came down, and then said conversationally, "The ballast in these lamps is Victorian, and it fails every winter. I've filed 3 complaints. Would you like to file a 4th? They enjoy it more when it's you." She had laughed shakily in the dark, and she had thought with a lurch, "He knew not to touch me. He knew not to speak. Who taught him that?" The answer she kept arriving at was the one she could not bear, so she stopped arriving at it, and instead she noticed things about him. She noticed that he was ill. It came on slowly, or perhaps it had always been there, and she only acquired the eyes for it. The tiredness she had seen in the first week deepened. Some mornings his hand shook on the quill, and he would put it down and press the hand flat to the desk until it stopped, and she would look away and pretend to be reading. Twice she saw him fail at simple magic, a summoning charm that did not lift the book, a warming spell on the tea that produced nothing at all, and both times he had made a joke of it with such practiced speed that she understood it was not the first time and would not be the last. And once, in January, she came back from lunch to find his door ajar and Draco standing at his window with his shirt cuff pushed up and his own wand pressed against the inside of his left forearm, murmuring something under his breath in a language she did not know. And the skin above the faded mark had gone the colour of an old coin, silver grey and dull, spreading in fine branching lines up toward his elbow. The same shape, the exact same branching shape that had spread in her own arm 3 years ago, before the treatment that a hereditary vault had been obliged to pay for. Hermione stepped back from the door before he could see her. She stood in the corridor with her hand over her mouth and the blood roaring in her ears. And she did not go into her office. She went down 4 floors and out into the atrium and across the river in the freezing air without a coat. And she walked and walked, and by the time she stopped, she was on Westminster Bridge with her hands white on the parapet, and she was doing the thing she did best, which was thinking. And the thinking was going somewhere she did not want it to go. Old magic can't build a thing without a way out of it. The vault was obliged to pay. You aren't difficult to read. You're only difficult to read about. She thought, he has the same scar. She thought, no, he has my scar. He's carrying my scar, and it is spreading in him the way it's spread in me, and my treatment was paid for by a hereditary vault under a standing instrument, and nobody has ever paid for his. She thought, finally, with a cold that had nothing to do with the January wind. What if it isn't a gift? What if the flowers aren't the point? What if the flowers are the only part he's allowed to give me, and everything else is something he's obliged to do, and it is costing him something, and it has been costing him something for 7 years? Hermione went back to the ministry at 4 o'clock with her hair wrecked by the wind and her hands numb. And she walked past her own door and knocked on his, and did not wait to be told to come in. He was at the desk. His sleeve was down and buttoned. He looked up at her with an expression of ordinary mild inquiry, and she saw the effort it took him to arrange it, and she thought, how long? How long have you been arranging your face for me? Malfoy, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you not to give me a sentence. Something happened behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition, she thought, as if he had been waiting for this knock for 6 weeks or 7 years. He set down his quill. He folded his hands on the desk, very carefully, one over the other, and she saw the left one was trembling, and saw him still it with the right. Ask, he said, what is your department's file on me? The silence that came down was so complete that she could hear the Victorian ballast humming in the lamp above his head. Because there is one, she went on, and her voice was shaking now, and she let it shake. You're the liaison for ancient houses and hereditary magic, and there is a hereditary instrument somewhere in this country with my name written into it, and I have been trying for 7 years to find out what it is. And you have been sitting 11 feet away from me for 4 months, handing me tea I never asked for, and knowing exactly how I take it." She put both hands flat on his desk and leaned in and made him look at her. "So, tell me, what is the file? And don't you dare tell me there isn't one, because you have never once, in 4 months, asked me why I went to Gringotts." Draco Malfoy looked up at her, and very slowly, with the exhausted care of a man lifting something far too heavy for his hands, he reached down and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He did not take anything out. His hand rested inside the open drawer for the length of 3 heartbeats. She could see the shape of it down there, the wrist bent, the fingers curled around something she could not see. And then he closed the drawer again, slowly, and pushed it shut with the flat of his palm until the catch clicked. "No," he said. Hermione had braced for lies. She had braced for denial, for the pleasant, empty voice of the stranger he became when the questions got too close, for the whole practiced architecture of deflection she had watched him build and rebuild for 4 months. She had not braced for the flat refusal of a man who had just, in front of her eyes, chosen not to lie. "No, there is a file." He said it looking directly at her, and his voice did not waver, though the hand he had used to close the drawer stayed pressed against the desk, as if it needed the wood to hold it still. "You're right about that. You're right about all of it, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, because you'd see through it, and you'd never trust another word out of my mouth. So, yes, there is a file. It has your name on it. I've had it since I took this post, and before that, I had it in my flat. And before that, it was in a vault in Wiltshire, and I have known what's in it since I was 17 years old." He drew a breath. "And I am not going to show it to you." The room went white at the edges. Hermione heard herself say, from somewhere far off, "You don't have the right to—" "I know exactly what rights I have. That's my entire profession." He stood up. The chair scraped. He walked past her to the door and shut it, not aggressively, just closing them in, and the click of the latch was very loud. And then he stood with his back against it and his hands behind him on the wood, as far from her as the small office allowed. "Granger, listen to me for 90 seconds and then shout at me for as long as you like, and I promise you I won't answer back. There is a thing in that drawer. If I hand it to you now, this afternoon, with the wind still in your hair and no preparation at all, then in 5 minutes you will know something about your own life that you cannot unknow, and there will be exactly one person in the world you can go to for the explanation of it, and that person will be me. Do you understand what that does? You'd be tied to me by the sheer mechanics of the information. Every question you had, you'd have to bring here. Every time you wanted to be angry about it, you'd have to be angry at the only person who could tell you what it meant. I would become," his jaw worked, "necessary to you, and I would rather cut my own hand off than be made necessary to you by an accident of timing. That is not your decision. It is precisely my decision, and I've made it wrongly for 7 years, and I'm going to make it wrongly for a few weeks more." His knuckles had gone white where he gripped the doorframe behind him. "But not forever. That's what I'm telling you. Not forever, and not for my sake. There's a date. The thing has a date on it, Granger. In March. And when it comes, I will put every scrap of it into your hands. All of it. The whole ugly business. And I will answer every question you ask me until you have no more. And then you will never have to see my face again. But it will be in March, when you've had time to prepare, and when there are options in front of you instead of a fait accompli. That is the only thing I have left that I can give you, and I'm giving it, and I'm sorry that it looks so much like being managed. The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. Managed, she repeated. That's the word you'd use, isn't it? He was watching her very closely now. That's the word you've been using in your own head since September, when you went to Gringotts and came back without a coat. Hermione's hands had begun to shake. She pressed them flat against her thighs. I have spent my entire adult life, she said, and her voice came out low and terrible, making myself into a person who could not be carried. Do you understand that? Do you have the faintest idea what it cost me? I altered my parents' memories at 17. I removed myself from their heads. Their daughter, Malfoy, I took her out and put her in a drawer, because I decided I would rather be alone than be a weight on anyone. I came out of that war with nothing, and no one, and I built a life, and I was proud of it. I was proud that I owed nothing to anybody. Her breath hitched and she forced it down. And then I find out that somewhere behind me, for 7 years, someone has had their hands under it the whole time. That the house was bought, that the scar was paid for, that the shield in Wapping wasn't mine. Do you know what that does to a person? It doesn't feel like being loved. It feels like discovering the floor you've been standing on is somebody else's hand, and every step you were proud of taking, you took on their palm. Something in his face broke open at that. She saw it, a fracture running clean across the composure. And he shut his eyes hard once, and when he opened them, they were wet, and he did not do anything about it. Yes, he said hoarsely. I know. That's why it's March. That makes no sense. It makes sense in March. It came out of him louder than anything she had ever heard from him in that room, and he stopped, appalled, and dragged his voice back down to almost nothing. It makes sense in March. There are things about the timing that I cannot say out loud in January without doing the exact damage I'm trying to avoid. I need you to hate me for 8 weeks. Can you do that? You're good at it. You've had the practice. Hate me for 8 weeks, and don't come to this office and take the Welsh file to Pemberton on the 3rd floor. And in March I will bring you everything, and you can hate me properly with the facts in your hands, which is the only kind of hating that's worth anything. Hermione stood in the middle of his office with her heart slamming and looked at him. He was still against the door with his hands behind him. His shirt cuff had ridden up at the left wrist in the moment he'd raised his voice, and above the buttoned edge she could see it, a thin fork of silver grey branching under the skin like frost on a window, climbing. Everything in her went cold and quiet. "Show me your arm," she said. He did not move. "No." "Draco." His name, and she watched it hit him exactly as it had hit her when he'd used hers on the bridge of some other conversation, watched his whole frame lock. "I saw you in here at lunchtime with your wand against it. I know that shape. I had it. It went up my arm from the elbow, and it was silver, and it branched like a river delta, and it took 11 sessions at 400 galleons each to burn it out of me, and somebody paid for that, and nobody has paid for yours. So take off the cuff, right now, or I will go to Pemberton, and to the Aura office, and to Kingsley himself, and I will make it a departmental matter, and neither of us wants that. The silence went on for a long, long moment. Then he raised his left hand, and, with the stiff fingers of the other, unbuttoned the cuff and pushed the sleeve up to the elbow. It was worse than she'd thought. The old mark was there, faded, dead, and spreading up from it, from the wrist and across the inner forearm, and reaching almost to the crook of the elbow, ran the silver branching, brighter than hers had been, more advanced, the skin around it thinned to a papery translucence where the finest tributaries ran. Hermione crossed the room without deciding to. She took his wrist in both hands and turned it toward the window light, and he let her, standing absolutely still with his breath held. And she looked at the thing eating its way up his arm and felt her eyes fill. "How long?" she said. "A while. How long? It comes and goes." His voice above her head was almost steady. "It's worse in winter. It's worse when—" He stopped. "When what?" "When I've had to use it," he said. "The magic. It draws on the caster. That's all. It's an old system, and it's badly designed, and it takes payment out of whoever's holding the other end of it." He tried, God help him, for lightness. "The healers can't do anything, before you ask. It isn't curse damage exactly. It's more like an account being debited. You can't heal a debit, Granger. You can only stop spending." She looked up at him. "Wapping," she said. He did not answer. "March in Wapping. 11 minutes. Something held a shield around me for 11 minutes with no caster in the room, and 11 minutes is a long time, isn't it? 11 minutes is a very long time to hold a protego against sustained fire, and it draws on the caster." Her hands had tightened on his wrist. "Where were you?" "On the 14th of March, 3 years ago, at about 4:30 in the afternoon." "Where were you?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "Where were you, Draco?" "I don't remember," he said. "You're lying." "Yes," he said simply. "I am. And I'm going to keep lying about that particular question until March, and you can hate me for that too." Hermione let go of his wrist. She stepped back from him. She wiped her face roughly with the heel of her hand, and she stood in the small office with the Victorian lamp humming overhead, and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, several things at once. That he was not her admirer, that there had never been an admirer, that there was some instrument, some contract, some obligation with a date on it, and it had been running for 7 years, and every time it had reached out to keep her alive, it had taken payment out of the man standing in front of her, and that he had never once, in 4 months of tea and lamplight and Dog Norman, given her the smallest hint of it, because the moment she knew, she would be in his debt, and he had decided that being in his debt would be worse for her than being ignorant. He had chosen to be eaten alive rather than be owed. "You absolute fool," she whispered. His head came up. "You've been paying for me, for 7 years, in your own arm." Her voice was cracking, and she could not stop it. "And you sat on the floor of my office and let me be angry about the flowers. You let me call it management. You let me stand here 5 minutes ago and say the floor was somebody else's hand, and you didn't tell me it was yours and it was bleeding. It isn't a kindness if you know about it, he said. His own voice had gone to nothing. That's the whole point, Granger. The instant you know, it becomes a claim. That's how debts work. That's my entire profession. I've watched families destroy each other for 400 years over exactly this. The second you know what someone spent on you, you're not free anymore. You start doing arithmetic. You start feeling grateful, and gratitude is the worst thing in the world to build anything on. And I would rather have nothing from you than have something you gave me because you'd seen my arm. That is the stupidest. Then it's stupid. He pushed off the door. But it's mine, and it's the only thing in my life I've done cleanly, and I'm not giving it up 8 weeks early because you're clever enough to have caught me at it. They stood a foot apart in the middle of the office, both of them shaking, and Hermione realized she had run out of arguments and had only one thing left in her, and it was not an argument at all. She reached out and took his bare forearm again, gently this time, not a demand, both her palms cradling the silver-branched skin. And she bent her head and pressed her mouth to the inside of his wrist, above the pulse, below the worst of it. She felt the shock go through him like a curse. Hermione. It came out wrecked, unrecognizable, and his free hand rose and hovered a bare inch from her hair, trembling, not touching, as though touching would end him. And through the closed door from the corridor came the sound of running feet and Harry Potter's voice shouting her name. Hermione let go of his wrist and stepped back an instant before the door opened. Harry came through it at a half-run, with his aura robes still fastened wrong at the shoulder, and he took in the room in one sweep. Hermione, white-faced by the desk, Draco standing very still with his left sleeve pushed to the elbow, and to his credit, he did not ask a single question about it. "They've found Roll," he said. "Thorfinn, alive, in a warehouse off the Isle of Dogs, and he's got the Pemberton case files with him, which means he's got names, which means every witness on that list has about 4 hours to live. We're going now. Robards wants you, because half those names are creature liaison contacts, and you're the only one who can tell us which of them will run and which will fight." He was already turning. 2 minutes, Hermione. Atrium. I'll get my coat. Granger. Draco's voice. She turned in the doorway. He had not moved. He was standing with his arms still bare and the silver branching plain in the lamplight, and something in his face she had never seen there before. Not the composure, not the guardedness, not even the raw thing that had surfaced twice and been drowned. This was naked and immediate, and it was fear, and it was not for himself. "Don't go," he said. Harry stopped in the corridor. "There's a room in that warehouse with a low ceiling and a stair behind you," Draco said. His voice was perfectly level, and his hand had found the edge of the desk. "I don't know how I know that. I don't know anything about the Isle of Dogs. But I have had, since about 11 o'clock this morning, the specific sensation I get before." He stopped himself, his jaw locked. "Don't go into any room today where you can't see the way out. That's all. That's the whole of what I'm permitted to say." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "Buy your own tea tomorrow," she said. "Mine's over-strong, and you never get it right." And she went. The warehouse was worse than the briefing. It was a Muggle building, 3 stories of rotting brick on a wharf where the Thames ran brown and fast beneath the boards, and it smelled of tar and cold iron and the sour green stink of river mud at low tide. Raoul had wards on it that took the breach team 11 minutes to unpick, and by the time they were through, he had already begun burning the files. And what followed was not a raid, but a running fight through 3 floors of stacked crates in the dark. Hermione lost Harry on the 2nd floor. That was the thing she would come back to afterward, over and over. The moment a blasting curse took out a stack of pallets between them, and the whole world became noise and splinters. And when the air cleared, she was alone in a corridor of crates with her ears ringing and no idea which way she had come. She found the stairs by feel. She went down them because down was out, and the stairs led her into a low room at the back of the building where the ceiling was barely a foot above her head, and the only light came from a grating high in the wall. And Thorfinn Roll was standing in it with a box of burning parchment at his feet. He was enormous, and he had lost most of his hair in Azkaban, and when he saw her, his face did something that was not quite a smile. "The mudblood," he said, almost fondly. "Well." She got her shield up before he finished the word. She was fast. She had been fast since she was 15, and she had spent 7 years getting faster. But he was very strong, and he was not alone in that room. There was a second man behind the crates that she had not seen, and the first 3 curses hit her protego together, and it went down like a sail in a gale. She dropped and rolled and came up behind an iron stanchion, and the 4th curse took the stanchion and half the wall behind it, and she felt something open along her ribs, hot, wet, immediate, and knew the next one would finish it. There was no way out. The stair was behind Roll. The grating was 10 feet up. Don't go into any room today where you can't see the way out. Hermione lifted her wand with a hand that was already going numb, and she thought, with a strange and total calm, "I am 22, and I never found out." And the light came. It did not come from her. It came from around her, out of the air itself, out of nothing at all. A dome of silver rising from the filthy floorboards in a rush, closing over her head with a sound like an indrawn breath. And Roll's 5th curse struck it and burst apart into harmless green sparks that fell around her like ash. She sat with her back against the stanchion, bleeding inside a shield no one had cast. She had 11 minutes to look at it this time, and she used every one of them. It was not a protego. She saw that within seconds. A protego is a surface. This was a volume, silver white and faintly moving, and along the inside of it, she had to press her face close to see, and afterward she was never sure whether the tears were from the light or from what she read, ran a continuous line of script, old letters, Latin, and beneath the Latin something older, running around the dome in an unbroken band, repeating, repeating. She could read enough of it. 7 years in a department that dealt in covenants had given her that much. Sub-protection, domus, under the protection of the house, non-tangature. She shall not be touched. And then, where the band came round to meet itself, a name, not hers. Malfoy. Something inside Hermione Granger came apart very quietly. She did not scream. She did not weep. She sat in a warehouse cellar on the Isle of Dogs with her ribs laid open and her blood soaking into 100-year-old boards, inside a dome of light bearing another family's name. And she watched Thorfinn Roll throw everything he had at it and fail. And she understood, with a clarity so total it was almost peaceful, that she had never once in 7 years been in danger of dying, and that every act of courage she had performed since she was 15 had been performed inside somebody else's hand. The dome held. It held while Roll raged, and it held while he tried to burn her out, and it held while the second team came through the wall above and took him down the hard way. And when Harry finally reached her, the light was still there and would not let him through until she put her palm against it, and it recognized something in her and dissolved into the air like breath off glass. Merlin, Hermione, your side, don't move. What time is it? She said. What time is it, Harry? He looked at his watch, bewildered. 4:20. She let her head fall back against the iron and closed her eyes. They took her to St. Mungo's. The gash in her side needed 6 hours and a blood-replenishing course, and she lay through all of it with her jaw set and her eyes on the ceiling, answering questions in monosyllables. And at midnight, she signed herself out against the express written objection of 2 healers and a mediwitch, and she apparated to the ministry. The atrium at 1 a.m. was blue and vast and empty. The lift took her up alone. The 4th floor corridor was dark except for one rectangle of light falling out of one open door, and she stood at the end of the passage and looked at it and thought, of course. He was on the floor. That was what she found when she came through the door. Draco Malfoy sitting on the floorboards of his office, with his back against the filing cabinet and his legs stretched out in front of him, grey to the lips, his shirt soaked through at the collar as though he had been running, his left arm cradled against his chest. The silver had reached his shoulder. It had come up out of the sleeve and across the collarbone in a fine, bright fork, and where it crossed the hollow of his throat, the skin had gone thin and translucent, and she could see the shadow of the vessels beneath it, and his eyes, when they found her, were unfocused and enormous. "You're alive," he said. 11 minutes, Hermione said. 11 and a half. He had a second man. I felt it. His head tipped back against the cabinet. He was breathing in shallow sips. "You're bleeding. Are you... Is it stitched? Did they close it?" "Don't ask me about my ribs." It came out of her like something torn. She crossed the room and went down on her knees in front of him and took his face in both hands, and his skin was cold and damp, and he leaned into her palms because he no longer had the strength not to. Look at me, Draco. Where were you at 4:20? Here. Doing what? Holding it, he said. And Hermione Granger, who had not cried in front of another human being since she was 19 years old, made a sound that was not a word at all and pressed her forehead to his and wept. He tried to lift his hand to her hair. He got it perhaps 4 inches off the floor before it fell back. "Don't," he murmured. "Don't do that. It's an old system, badly designed, I told you. It costs what it costs. It goes back down again in a week or so. It always does it." He was quiet. "Does it go back down again, Draco? Or does it go up a little further every year and never quite return, And that's why it's at your throat in January, when it was at your elbow at lunchtime and at your wrist in October. She lifted her head and looked at him. How many more times can you hold it? Enough. How many? Enough for you, he said. That's the only figure that's ever mattered, and I've done the arithmetic more carefully than you'd believe. She stood up. She was shaking so badly she had to steady herself on the desk, and the 6 hours of stitching sang along her ribs, and she looked down at the man on the floor who had spent 7 years quietly emptying himself into her survival and had never once let her see the bill. Then she walked around the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Granger. He tried to get up. He could not. Inside was a flat case of black leather, and inside the case a single sheet of vellum so old it had gone the colour of weak tea, folded in 3 and sealed with a broken disc of green wax. She opened it on the desk with hands that would not keep still. It was written in 2 hands. The body of it was formal, ancient, dense with the dog Norman he had taught her to read in October. She found Ava de Vif in the 4th line and nearly laughed and nearly vomited. At the foot of it were 3 signatures. One was a name she did not recognize, some Malfoy dead 4 centuries. One was a spatter of dried brown-black that had been blood, and one was his, Draco Lucius Malfoy. Signed in a 17-year-old's shaking hand and dated the 27th of March, the night of the drawing room, the night of the knife. Her eyes went up the page and found the clause, and the clause had her name in it, and it was not the word protection at all. Sponsalia. Betrothal. The vellum slipped out of her fingers and drifted to the desk, and Hermione turned around very slowly to face the man on the floor and heard her own voice come out of her from a very long way away. Draco, what did you do? He did not try to stand again. He sat against the filing cabinet with his ruined arm across his chest and looked up at her, and when he spoke, his voice was thin and clear and completely without defense, the voice of a man who has been rehearsing an answer for 7 years and has just discovered that none of the rehearsals were any use. She had you on the floor, he said. You know that part. You were there for it. I remember the floor. Then you'll remember she'd stopped asking questions. That's the thing nobody understands about my aunt. The questions were never the point. They were the pretext. And when she got bored of the pretext, she got quiet. She'd gone quiet. She had the knife against your throat, the little one, the silver one she used for... He stopped and swallowed. And my father was standing there working out whether the Dark Lord would be more annoyed by a dead mudblood or a delayed one, and my mother had her hand on my arm and was pressing down hard enough to bruise, which was her way of telling me to keep my mouth shut, and I understood with complete clarity that you had perhaps 90 seconds left, and there was nothing I could do. I want you to be very clear about that, because I've had 7 years to be clear about it. I couldn't duel my aunt. I couldn't reach you. I couldn't call for help. There wasn't any help. There was nobody in that house who wanted you alive except me, and I was a coward, and everybody in that room knew it, including me. Wand work was useless. Words were useless. There was exactly one thing in that house with more authority than Bellatrix Lestrange, and it wasn't a person. Hermione's hands had gone to the edge of the desk behind her. The house, she said. The house. He nodded once. The old families don't run on people, Granger. They run on instruments. Every one of us is born into a lattice of oaths 400 years deep, and my aunt was inside it as much as I was. She'd married into it. She'd sworn on it. Her magic was pledged to it. And there is one clause in the Malfoy Charter, one that outranks every other obligation in the document. It's the oldest thing in there. It predates the family's arrival in England. It's half in a language nobody's spoken since the 12th century. And it exists because a very long time ago, somebody's daughter was murdered by her own in-laws over an inheritance, and the house rewrote itself so it could never happen again. He was breathing carefully now, in shallow, measured sips, as though speech cost something he was running short of. Sponsalia, the betrothal claim. If the heir of the house names an intended before witnesses of the blood, that person comes under the absolute protection of the house magic from the instant of naming. Not protection from outsiders, protection from us, from the family. Nobody who is bound by Malfoy oaths can raise a hand against the heirs intended. Not the head of the house, not a sworn relation. A tiny, awful flicker of the mouth. Not an aunt. Hermione's legs had stopped being reliable. She sat down on the edge of the desk. "You named me," she said. "I said 11 words. I have never in my life said anything faster or worse. My aunt looked at me as though I'd taken my own head off and set it on the table, and my father made a noise I'd never heard him make. And the knife." He stopped. His eyes had gone somewhere behind her. "The knife came away from your throat. It didn't move because she chose to move it. Her hand opened. The house took her hand open, and she couldn't close it again, and she screamed. And that's when the chandelier came down, and the elf came, and the rest of it happened, and you were gone." He came back into the room, into his own face, and looked at her. "That's what I did. That's the whole of it. I bound myself in front of my parents and my aunt at 17 in 90 seconds because I could not think of another way to make the knife stop." The office hummed. The Victorian ballast in the lamp overhead droned its winter drone. "And then," Hermione said very quietly, "the war ended. And then the war ended. And you didn't tell me. No, for 7 years. For 7 years. Why?" It ripped out of her. "You could have come to me the week after. You could have written a letter. 'Granger, I did an appalling thing to save your life. Here are the papers. Let's undo it.' I'd have, God, Draco, I'd have thanked you. I'd have shaken your hand in the middle of Diagon Alley in front of the Prophet. Why in the name of everything would you sit on it until it ate its way up your arm?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because of the way out," he said. She went cold. "You told me," she said slowly. "In November, on the floor of my office. Old magic can't build a thing without a way out of it. They have to leave a door. They have to leave a door. What's the door, Draco?" He closed his eyes. "The Sponsalia has exactly one release," he said. "The intended must be told the whole truth of it, freely told by the one who named her, with nothing withheld. And then she must refuse, out loud, of her own will, not under duress, not out of obligation, not to be kind. A free refusal given by a person who understands exactly what she's refusing." His throat worked. "That's the door. There isn't another. It can't be dissolved by the Wizengamot. It can't be bought out. It can't be broken by my death. It just passes to the next holder of the charter, which is nobody, which means it would hang over you unadministered forever. One door, her refusal, freely given. Hermione's mind was already 3 moves ahead, and she hated where it had arrived. "Say it," she said. "Say the rest of it. You know the rest of it. I want to hear you say it out loud in this room." He opened his eyes, and there was such exhaustion in them, such an enormous and patient exhaustion, that she understood she was looking at a man who had carried the sentence she was demanding for the better part of a decade without once being able to set it down. "If I had come to you in the week after," Draco said, "you'd have been 19 years old, and I'd have handed you a document that said, 'I saved your life and gave up my inheritance and my family and every prospect I had to do it.' And then I'd have said, 'Now refuse me,' out loud, freely." His voice cracked straight down the middle. "And you would have. You'd have refused. And you'd have spent the rest of your life not entirely sure whether you refused because you wanted to, or because you were 19 and frightened, and it was the tidiest thing available. Or, worse, Granger, and this is the one that kept me awake, you'd have hesitated. You'd have looked at what it cost me, and you'd have felt the arithmetic start, and you'd have thought he saved me. I can't just... And the magic would have felt it. The magic reads the will. A refusal given out of guilt isn't free, and it wouldn't have taken, and the contract would have stood, and you'd have been bound to me anyway, and by then you'd have known about it. Which is worse than not knowing. That's the whole trap. If I tell you badly, I don't free you. I only make you a prisoner who can see the walls. So you told me nothing. So I told you nothing, and I let it run, and I paid for it, and I waited for a version of you who wouldn't refuse me out of gratitude or accept me out of debt. A version of you who was whole, who had her own life and her own money and her own house and owed nobody anything." He gave a wrecked scrap of a laugh. "Which, yes, I'm aware. I built that woman with a secret vault while telling myself I was waiting for her to be free. I'm aware of the shape of it. I've been aware since about the 3rd year, and I did it anyway, because the alternative was letting the scar spread up your arm, and I have never once been able to find the arithmetic where I let that happen." Hermione stood up off the desk. She walked to the window. Outside, the enchanted view showed a January night that was not the real sky, and she stood in front of it with her arms wrapped around herself, carefully because of the stitches. "March," she said. "The 27th, 7 years to the night." He shifted against the cabinet. She heard the effort in it. 7-year term. The instrument comes to its first renewal at the 7th anniversary, and at renewal the door opens wider. For one night the terms can be read aloud in full by either party and answered on the spot. It's the only night the release is clean. That's why I said March. That's why I couldn't say it in January. I wasn't managing you, Granger. I was... He stopped and shook his head slowly. "No, I was. I was managing you. I've been managing you since I was 17. I dressed it up in mechanics because the mechanics happened to be true. But you were right this afternoon, and you were right in September, and I don't intend to argue with you about it anymore. I decided, alone, for 7 years what you could carry. That's the crime, not the contract, the deciding." She did not turn around. "Yes," she said. "It is. I know. You don't know." Her voice was shaking. "You think the injury here is that you saved my life without asking. It isn't. I'd have taken that. I'd have taken the vault and the house and the shield. I'd have hated it. I'd have shouted, and I'd have got over it. Because a person who saves your life without permission is only arrogant, and I can live with arrogance." She turned around at last. Her face was wet, and she did not care. "The injury is that for 4 months I sat in a room with you and thought I was being known. The tea, the chair by the door, the lamp held low so it wasn't in my eyes. I thought, do you understand what I thought? I thought that after 7 years of being a war exhibit, I had finally met one person who simply saw me. And you knew. You knew the whole time that the reason you could read me was that you'd been reading me since you were 17 out of a file in a drawer." He made a sound. "No," he said. "No. Granger, no. That isn't... Don't. That is not where the tea came from." He was trying to get up now, and failing, and trying again with his good hand braced on the floor. "The file has your birth date, and your medical record, and the deed to a house. It doesn't say she takes it over strong. It doesn't say she stands with both doors in view. It doesn't say she goes quiet before she gets angry, and she straightens things that are already straight." He got his shoulder against the cabinet and shoved himself upright, swaying. "I learned that in October, across a corridor like anyone would. I learned it because I watched you, and I watched you because..." His breath went. "Because for 4 months, I got to be a man who worked across the hall from you, and I have never wanted anything in my life the way I wanted to keep that. And I knew exactly how many weeks I had before it ended, and I spent every one of them memorizing how you take your tea." Hermione stood very still. "That's the part I don't get to keep," he said. "Whatever happens in March, the contract goes, and that's right. That's what should happen. But so does the corridor and the ledgers, and you shouting at me about Dog Norman, and I've known that from the first day, and I did it anyway, because an hour of it was worth the whole of the rest." He was grey to the lips and holding himself up on the cabinet by main force. "So no, don't tell me the 4 months were the file. The 4 months were the only honest thing I've ever had." She crossed the room. She did not know what she meant to do until she was doing it. She took his weight, got her shoulder under his good arm, and lowered them both to the floor before he fell, and they ended sitting side by side against the filing cabinet, with the vellum lying open on the desk above them, and the lamp humming, and London silent beyond the false window. For a long time, neither of them said anything. "The 27th of March, Hermione said at last. "The 27th of March. 9 weeks. 9 weeks." His head had come to rest against the cabinet, turned toward her. "And then you'll refuse me, freely, and it will be over, and the arm will stop, and you'll have your life back with nobody's hand under it. That's the good ending, Granger. I want you to understand that I know it's the good ending. I've wanted it for you for 7 years." Hermione looked at the ruined silver branching across his throat and at the exhausted face above it, and heard herself say something she had absolutely not planned. "And what if I don't?" She felt him stop breathing. "What if I don't refuse?" "Don't," he said. It came out of him in pieces. "Don't do that. Don't. Granger, please. That's gratitude talking. That's the 6 hours of stitches and the shield in the cellar talking. And if you say that to me now, I will believe you, and I have exactly enough left in me to survive one of these conversations, and not two. I'm not finished, she said. And she turned, awkwardly, painfully, and took his face in her hands for the second time that night, and made him look at her. I'm going to go away, she said. Not from the department, from you. 9 weeks. No corridor, no ledgers, no tea. I'm going to take the whole thing apart in a room where you aren't, until I know which parts of it are gratitude and which parts are mine. Because you're right about one thing, and only one thing, Draco. And it's that a debt is a filthy foundation, and I won't build on it either. Her thumbs moved once across his cheekbones. And on the 27th of March I'll come to you, and I'll tell you what I found. And whatever it is, it will be free. You've spent 7 years buying me a life where I owe nobody anything. Well, congratulations. It worked. And the first thing I'm going to do with it is make you a promise you can actually trust. He was crying silently and had no hands steady enough to stop it. 9 weeks, he whispered. 9 weeks. She let go of his face and got to her feet and stood over him a moment longer, and the stitches burned along her ribs, and she barely felt them. Don't hold anything for me while I'm gone. Do you hear me? Nothing. Not a shield, not a coin, not a flower. If it costs you, don't spend it. I can't promise that. I know, Hermione said. Try anyway. And she walked out of his office and left the door open behind her and did not look back, because if she had looked back, she would not have gone. She kept her word about the corridor. She took the Welsh file to Pemberton on the 3rd floor and requested, in writing, a reassignment of the joint casework, and the memorandum came back approved within a day, which told her that he had countersigned it without argument. His door stayed shut after that. The stack of shared parchment on the windowsill between their offices sat where it was for a fortnight, gathering dust in a building where dust was theoretically not permitted. And then, one morning, it was gone, and Hermione stood in the passage, looking at the bare sill for rather longer than a person should look at a piece of furniture. She did not go and knock. She had said 9 weeks. She had never in her life failed to keep a term she had set herself, and she was not going to begin with this. But she had not promised to stop looking. She began with the manor. It took her 4 days to find it, and she found it in the least magical place imaginable. The Wiltshire County Land Registry, in a muggle office in Trowbridge that smelled of photocopier toner and instant coffee, where a bored clerk pulled up the title history of a large private estate near Marlborough and turned the screen toward her without any idea what she was looking at. Sold, March 4th, 2001. Hermione stared at the date until the numbers stopped meaning anything. March 2001, 10 days before Wapping. 10 days before the shield that held for 11 minutes in a cellar in the Isle of Dogs, and 400 galleons a session for 11 sessions, had been settled in full for her arm the winter before that, and the house in Hampstead had been bought outright in the spring of the year after. And here on a screen in a Muggle County office was the answer to a question she had never quite dared to formulate. Where did the money come from? Not a vault, not an allowance. He had sold the house. She sat in her car in the registry car park. She had driven. because driving gave her hands something to do. And she put her forehead against the steering wheel and thought about a boy in a warm Undercroft kitchen who had told her in some other life, in some other story, that he loathed the place. Except he had not told her that. That was the strange thing. The thought arrived with the whole texture of a memory and belonged to no conversation she had ever had. He had never once discussed the manor with her. He had spent 4 months across a corridor from her and had never mentioned that he no longer had a home, and she had never asked because she had been busy building a staircase. The Ministry Pension Office told her the rest when she went at it sideways. A liaison salary at grade 4 was 410 galleons a year. He had listed no other income. He had listed, under dependents, one name: N. Malfoy, mother, Wiltshire, permanent care. Permanent care. Narcissa. Malfoy, who had lied to the Dark Lord's face in a forest, was in a care ward somewhere, and her son was paying for it out of 410 galleons a year, and had sold the only asset his family had left, and had spent the proceeds keeping a Muggle-born girl's childhood house from being knocked down. Hermione went home and was sick, and then sat on her kitchen floor for 2 hours with her back against the cupboards, looking at 8 white flowers on a windowsill that had never once died. The letters came in the 6th week. They came from Andromeda Tonks, of all people, in a flat brown package with a note pinned to it in her sharp slanted hand. Hermione. I have thought for 3 years about whether to send you these, and have decided that the war ended, and I am tired of secrets. He gave them to me to burn. I did not burn them. Do with them what you like, but do not tell him I kept them, because he asked me not to, and he does not have very much left that anyone has honoured. A. There were 41. They were not love letters. That was what undid her. She had braced for love letters, had braced for the awful pornography of another person's longing, and instead she found 41 sheets of parchment in a cramped, precise hand, every one of them addressed to her, every one of them dated, and every one of them a report. November 14th, 1999. Your account at St. Mungo's has been settled, and the healer has been instructed to attribute it to a hardship fund. I have looked at the fund's charter, and it is real and it does exist, and if you ever check it, it will hold. You will not be humiliated by this. That is the only part I am able to control. February 3rd, 2000. You gave evidence at the Yaxley trial today. You look tired. I was in the public gallery at the back with a glamour on because my presence would have been used against you in the papers, and I have decided that is a thing I can do for you, not be there. I want it recorded somewhere that not being there is the hardest work I have ever done. March 4th, 2001. The house is sold. I am not going to write down what it felt like to sign it, because you are never going to read this, and self-pity in a document nobody reads is simply lying to oneself in private. The money is placed. It will cover the Hampstead property and hold enough besides to run the protection for another decade if the winters are kind. My mother is settled at the Trelawney ward and does not know the house is gone. She asks about the peacocks. I tell her they are well. March 14th, 2001. Something happened today. I do not know what. At about 4:30, the instrument opened all at once, the way it does when the danger is immediate, and it took more than it has ever taken. I could not stand up afterward for some time. I do not know where you were or what was coming for you, and I will never know, and I find that I mind that far more than the arm. I would like, once, to know what I am protecting you from. It seems unfair that the one part I am not permitted is the knowing. September 19th, 2002. Happy birthday. The hellebores are difficult this year. The glass house at Marlborough went with a house, and I have had to learn to grow them myself, which I am doing badly, in a window box, in a rented flat in Clapham that has damp. It is absurd. I am a Malfoy standing in a muggle window box in the rain at 5 in the morning with a pair of secateurs, and I would not trade it, and I am aware of what that says about me, and I have stopped arguing with it. September 19th, 2004. 22 soon. 7 years next March. I have begun to think about how to tell you, and every version I compose is worse than the last. Here is the difficulty, stated plainly, since nobody will ever read it. I do not want to be refused. That is the entire trouble. The refusal is the correct outcome. It is the outcome I have worked toward. It is the door, and I built the corridor that leads to it. And I do not want it. And wanting is exactly the thing that makes me unfit to be the one who tells you. A man who wants an answer cannot be trusted to ask the question, and there is nobody else who can ask it. So it will have to be me, wanting, asking anyway, and trying with everything I have to keep the wanting out of my voice. Hermione read them all in one sitting on her kitchen floor, with the January dark coming down outside and her tea going cold on the counter. And when she reached the last one, she put her hands over her face and stayed like that for a long time. There was nothing in the 41 letters that asked her for anything. Not one line. He had written to her for 7 years, and not once, said, "I love you." He had said the fund is real and it will hold. He had said, "Not being there is the hardest work I have ever done." He had said, "I have stopped arguing with it." And Hermione, who had spent 9 weeks trying to separate gratitude from her own true feeling, like someone picking sand out of rice, discovered that the letters had done her sorting for her. Because you cannot be grateful to a man for growing hellebores badly in a damp window box in Clapham. You can only love him for it, or not. She sat on her floor and asked herself, in the plainest terms she could construct, the question she had promised to answer. If the contract had never existed, if he had never said those 11 words, if Bellatrix had never, if none of it, if you had simply met him in October across a corridor, a tired man with a bad arm and a good ear for Dog Norman, who took the chair by the door without being asked, who lit his wand low so it wouldn't blind you, who never once in 4 months asked you for a single thing. Would you want him? The answer came so fast and with such force that she actually laughed out loud in her empty kitchen, one wet, ugly bark of a laugh, and then covered her mouth with both hands. She had known since the leaky in October. She had known when she stopped watching the doors. The 8th week was the worst. She saw him once. It was pure accident. She came out of the lift at the 4th floor at 8 in the morning, and he was at the far end of the corridor with his back to her, unlocking his door, and she stopped dead with her hand still on the lift grill. He had got thinner. His coat hung off the shoulders, and when he lifted his hand to the lock, she saw the silver at his wrist where the cuff had ridden up, and it was worse, brighter, higher, and there was something wrong with the way he was holding the arm, a stiffness, as though the elbow no longer wanted to bend. "Don't hold anything for me while I'm gone. I can't promise that." He got the door open. He went in. He never knew she was there, and Hermione rode the lift back down to the atrium and walked out into the street and stood among the muggles on Whitehall in the freezing rain, and shook. Because she had done the arithmetic he had done. She had sat with the 41 letters and the county registry printout and the pension file, and she had understood the shape of the thing at last, and the shape was this. The instrument did not merely cost him when it fired, it cost him continuously. It was a standing obligation on a house with one surviving member, and every day it stood, it drew, and it had been drawing for 7 years. And the reason the silver had reached his throat was not Wapping and not the Isle of Dogs, but the simple accumulated arithmetic of a decade of standing between her and the world. 9 weeks had been for her. 9 weeks, so that her answer would be clean. And in 9 weeks, the silver had come up out of his sleeve and across his collarbone, and there were still 11 days to go. She went back to the ministry that afternoon and did the only thing she could think of that would not break her word. She went to the Department of Mysteries, and she called in every favour that a war heroine has and does not spend. And she sat for 6 hours with an unspeakable named Croaker, who dealt in binding magic, and who did not ask her a single question about why she wanted to know. "Free refusal dissolves it," he said at last, pushing his spectacles up. "That's the door, and it's a real door. It'll open. But you want to understand what you're asking, Miss Granger, because most people don't. Dissolution isn't cancellation. 7 years of standing obligation don't simply evaporate. The magic has to close the account. When the intended refuses, the whole outstanding charge falls due at once." Hermione's blood went to water. Falls due on whom? On the Protector, of course. Croaker frowned at his notes. "It's his instrument. He carries the debit. On dissolution, it all comes home in one stroke." He looked up. "In practice? A young man in good health, 3 or 4 years of it, he'd be flat on his back a month. 7 years, with the sign already at the throat." He stopped and had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'd want him somewhere with healers." Hermione stood up so fast her chair went over. "You're telling me," she said, and her voice did not sound like hers, "that if I refuse him, if I do the only thing that frees either of us, it might kill him." "I'm telling you, it's a real debt, and it will be collected." Croaker took off his spectacles. "And I'm telling you the alternative is that it goes on collecting slowly forever, which will certainly kill him, only later and by inches, and he'll be conscious for all of it." He shrugged, not unkindly. "There isn't a version where nobody pays. There's only who and when and whether it's finished." Hermione walked out of the Department of Mysteries into a corridor that seemed to be tilting, and she got as far as the lift before her legs stopped working, and she sat down on the cold floor of the Ministry of Magic with her back against the wall and her arms around her knees, and understood, at last, entirely, why he had needed 9 weeks. Not for her to sort gratitude from love, for her to be able to choose, knowing that either answer might end him. 11 days later, on the 27th of March, at 9 o'clock at night, Hermione Granger stood in the rain outside a converted terrace in Clapham with a window box on the second floor and a light burning behind the curtain, and raised her hand to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched it. He must have been standing on the other side of it. He must, she thought afterward, have been standing there for some time. Perhaps since 8, perhaps since morning, because there was no sound of footsteps in the hall, no rattle of a chain, only the door swinging inward, and Draco Malfoy filling the gap with the yellow light of a cheap rented hallway behind him. She had thought she was prepared. She had spent 11 days being prepared. He had a stick. That was the first thing. A plain black walking stick with a worn handle, and his weight was on it, and the left hand did not move at all. It hung against his side with the fingers half curled, the way a hand hangs when the arm above it has stopped taking instruction. The silver had come up out of his collar and across the left side of his throat, and had reached the underside of his jaw, a fine, bright delta of it climbing toward his ear. And where it ran, the skin had gone the thin, translucent grey of frost on a window, and beneath the frost she could see the shadow of the vein. "You're wet," he said. "It's raining." "Yes." He stood aside. "Come in before it gets worse. The stairs are steep, and the third one is a liar. Mind your foot." The flat was 2 rooms and a kitchen the size of a cupboard. It was scrupulously clean and almost entirely empty. A table, 2 chairs, a bed visible through a doorway, a single shelf of books. No pictures, no portraits, nothing on the walls at all. And in the window, on the sill above the radiator, a long wooden box of soil with 9 white hellebores standing in it in the dark, their heads turned toward the glass. 9. She counted them twice. "The 9th's for September," he said, following her eyes. He lowered himself into one of the 2 chairs with the care of a man handling something breakable, and the stick went against the table. "I start them in autumn. It seemed I've kept doing it. I'm aware it's absurd. You can say so." "I'm not going to say so." "No?" A pause. "You've read the letters." Hermione's head came round. "Andromeda's a terrible liar," he said, "and a worse actress, and she has been asking after your health with an entirely uncharacteristic frequency since November." The corner of his mouth did the thing that never became a smile. "It's all right. I'd have burned them and been sorry. She's cleverer than both of us." Hermione sat down in the other chair because standing had become impossible. 41, she said. "Was it? I never counted." "You wrote to me for 7 years, and you never once said—" "No," he agreed. "I never once said." "Why?" "Because it would have been a claim." He said it without heat, an old settled thing. "Everything else in those letters is administration. A man can send a woman a bank statement. The other thing is a hand on the scale, and I'd already put both hands on the scale of your entire life without asking, and I decided that the one place I could keep clean was the record. So the record is clean." He looked at her steadily. "It's the only reason I can sit here tonight and ask you the question. I've got nothing in the bank with you, Granger. No confessions, no declarations. Whatever you say to me now, you're not answering anything I asked for." The rain went on the window. The radiator ticked. "Then ask it," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in his face had been put deliberately away, filed, shut in a drawer, and she recognized the movement because she had watched him do it in a ministry corridor 100 times. "There's a form," he said. "I have to say it all. Every term, nothing withheld. That's the condition, and the magic will know if I hold anything back, so I'm going to be very thorough, and I'd ask you not to interrupt, because if I stop, I'm not certain I'll start again." "All right." He reached inside his coat with his good hand and brought out the vellum and laid it on the table between them and did not unfold it. On the 27th of March 1998, in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor, before witnesses of the blood, I named you as intended of the house under the clause of sponsalia, without your knowledge and without your consent, for the purpose of preventing your murder. From that instant, you have been under the absolute protection of the house magic. It cannot be given up by me. It cannot be sold, transferred, revoked, or ended by my death. It has protected you from every mortal danger within its reach for 7 years, including on the 14th of March 2001, and again on the 9th of January this year, from death. The cost of that protection has been drawn continuously from the protector. That is me. There is no one else. The house has one member. It has cost me the estate at Marlborough, which I sold in 2001 to fund it, and the use of my left arm, and a certain amount of ordinary magic which no longer answers when I call it. My mother is in permanent care at the Trelawney ward and does not know about any of this, and the fees are current, and they will remain current whatever you decide tonight, because I've placed that separately, and it can't be touched. You have received, every year on the 19th of September, 1 white hellebore sent by me. That was not required by the instrument. That was the only part of it that was mine, and I want it on the record that it was a liberty, and if it distressed you, I'm sorry for it. Tonight is the 7th anniversary. It is the only night on which the instrument can be dissolved cleanly. The release exists, and it has one form. I must tell you everything, which I have now done, and you must refuse the betrothal out loud freely of your own will, not out of anger, not out of pity, not out of obligation. Free. He stopped. He was breathing shallowly. "And there is a last term," he said, "which I did not know until January, and which you deserve to have from me and not from anyone else. When you refuse, the outstanding charge falls due in one payment, 7 years of it, all at once, on me." He held her eyes. "I've been told it may be survivable. I've also been told the arithmetic doesn't favor it. I want you to hear that from my mouth so that nobody can ever tell you that you weren't warned. And then I want you to refuse me anyway, and I want you to do it tonight, because if you don't, this goes on drawing until it finishes me by degrees, and you'd be tied to a corpse's charter for the rest of your life with no door left at all." The rain filled the silence. "That's everything," he said. "Nothing withheld. The magic's satisfied. You can feel it, I expect, if you look for it. It's waiting." She could feel it. That was the horror. There was something in the room now, patient and old, and entirely without opinion, listening. Hermione stood up. "Now I talk," she said. "Granger, you had your form. I get mine." She walked to the window to the 9 white flowers and put her fingertips on the cold sill beside them and looked out at the wet Clapham street. 9 weeks. You gave me 9 weeks so my answer would be clean, and I want you to know that I used every single day of them, and I want you to know what I did with them, because you're going to sit there and assume it was all mercy, and it was not. I went to Trowbridge. I sat in a Muggle Records office and watched a clerk pull up the sale of your house on a computer screen. I went to the pension office and found out what a grade 4 liaison earns. I read 41 letters on my kitchen floor in one sitting, and I was sick afterward, twice. She turned around. And then I did the thing you were most afraid of, Draco. I sat down and I tried to work out how much of what I feel is gratitude. His hand had closed on the head of the stick. It took me 4 days to find the right test, she said. And the test was this. Take it all away. Every galleon, every shield, the house, the arm, the whole 7 years. Take the contract out of the world entirely. Suppose you'd never said those 11 words. Suppose I'd walked into that corridor in October and found a tired man across the hall with a good ear for old grammar, who took the seat by the door without being asked, who lit his wand low so it wouldn't blind me, who sat on my office floor at 10 at night arguing about fences, and who never once in 4 months asked me for a single thing. Her voice was steady, and her eyes were streaming, and she let them. Would I want him? And I laughed, Draco, alone in my kitchen, because I already knew. I'd known since the leaky in October, when I sat with my back to a wall and forgot to watch the doors for 40 minutes. And I have never done that with anyone. Not with Harry, not with Ron, not once in 7 years. And it wasn't the contract that did it. There's no clause in that vellum that makes me feel safe. Protection isn't safety. Protection is what you gave me. Safety was you in the dark corridor holding the light down at knee height and talking about Victorian ballast until I could breathe. Don't, he said hoarsely. I'm not finished. She crossed to the table. So, that's what I found in 9 weeks. It's mine. It isn't gratitude, and it isn't debt, and it isn't the magic, and I have tested it to destruction the way I test everything, and it holds. She put both hands flat on the vellum between them. Which brings me to what I'm going to do about it, and you're not going to like it. I went to the Department of Mysteries. I know about the charge falling due. I've known for 11 days. I knew before you finished telling me, and I let you tell me anyway, because you needed to say it, and I wasn't going to take that from you. She leaned in. And I know something else, which Croker was very careful about, and which you may not know. The refusal has to be free, which means it has to be mine, which means, Draco, that no one on this earth, not the house, not the magic, not you sitting there having done your arithmetic and decided how my evening should end, no one gets to tell me when to give it. The colour went out of what was left of his face. You can't hold it. I can hold it as long as I like. It's my refusal. It's the one thing in this entire 7-year catastrophe that belongs to me and not to you. She straightened. And I'm not giving it to you tonight in a rented flat with no healer in the building, and you unable to stand up without a stick, because the outstanding charge falls due in one stroke, and you die on that chair, and I would have killed you, and I would have to live with that for the rest of my life, having loved you first. The word went off in the little room like a dropped glass. He made a sound. It was not a word. His good hand came up and covered his mouth, and above it his eyes had gone enormous, and Hermione watched 7 years come apart in a man's face in the space of 2 seconds. "You don't." He got it out through his fingers. "Granger, you can't say that tonight. Of all the nights, you can't." "I've said it. It's said. It's on the record with the rest." She was crying properly now, and she did not stop talking. "And before you tell me it's gratitude, I've just spent 9 weeks proving it isn't, in front of witnesses, with documents, which is the only way I know how to prove anything. You want free? That's free. Nobody made me come here in the rain. Nobody made me sit on a floor with 41 of your letters and understand that a man who grows hellebores badly in a window box in Clapham because a girl he isn't allowed to speak to likes flowers that bloom in the cold is not a man doing his duty. That's not administration, Draco. You put 9 of them in that box. 9. For a birthday in September that's 6 months away." He had bent forward over the stick, his shoulders shaking, his hand still over his mouth. She knelt down in front of him on the bare floorboards. "So, here's what happens," she said, taking his face in both hands and turning it up, and his cheeks were wet under her palms, and the silver at his jaw was cold as glass to the touch. "You're not doing this in Clapham. Tomorrow we go to St. Mungo's, to the 4th floor, where Croker has already spoken to the head healer of curse damage, and where there is a bed and a full team and a stasis field standing by, all of which I arranged 8 days ago, because I am always going to be 5 moves ahead of you, and you may as well learn to enjoy it. And there, with people who can catch you, I will refuse you, out loud, freely, and you will let them work, and you will live. You can't know that. And when you're standing up again," Hermione said, "with the contract gone and nothing between us at all, no vault, no house, no charter, nothing owed in either direction, I am going to ask you a question of my own. And you're going to answer it as a free man with no arithmetic in your mouth." He was staring at her as if she was something on fire. "What question?" he whispered. She leaned in, and her forehead came to rest against his, and she felt his breath break apart against her lips. "Ask me on the 4th floor," she said, "when it's done." And his good hand came up out of his lap and found the back of her neck and pulled. He pulled and then stopped an inch away with his hand shaking against the back of her neck and his breath coming in pieces. "No," he said. "No, not tonight. Draco. Not while it's still standing." His fingers were tangled in her hair and he did not let go, but he held her there, that 1 inch off, and his eyes were fierce and wet and absolutely immovable. Do you know what the magic would call that? An acceptance. Not in words. It reads the will, Granger, and if you kiss me tonight with that thing still active, it may take it as consent and close the door for good. And then you'd be my wife by an instrument I signed at 17 while you were bleeding on a carpet, and I would rather die on this chair, which, as you've pointed out, I'm quite well positioned to do. A ragged breath. Tomorrow, on the 4th floor, when it's gone and there's nothing left to misread. Hermione let out something between a sob and a laugh. 7 years, she said, and now you develop patience. I've had a great deal of practice. His thumb moved once against her nape. 1 more night, Hermione. I've done 2,500 of them. I can do 1 more if it means the next one is real. They took him in at 9 the following morning, and by 11 the fourth floor of St. Mungo's had been cleared of everything that was not necessary. The room was white and high-windowed and full of March light. They had him on the bed with his shirt off, and the silver plain across his chest and throat and shoulder, and there were 4 healers, and Croker at the back with his spectacles pushed up, and a stasis field humming at the perimeter of the mattress like a held note, and a bank of instruments Hermione did not recognize and did not ask about. Andromeda Tonks sat by the door with her hands folded, having arrived without being invited, and refused, with great courtesy, to leave. "When you're ready, Miss Granger," the head healer said. "One clean statement. Don't hedge it. The magic will take hedging as doubt." Hermione sat on the edge of the bed and took Draco's good hand in both of hers. "Look at me," she said. He looked. He was grey and frightened and trying very hard not to show either, and she could feel the pulse going in his wrist far too fast. "I'm going to say it now," she said, "and I want you to hear the whole of it, because you only ever hear the first half of things." She took a breath. "I, Hermione Granger, refuse the betrothal of the House of Malfoy. I refuse it freely and of my own will, knowing what it did for me, knowing what it cost, and owing nothing to anyone." Her voice did not shake. "I refuse the contract. I do not refuse the man." The room went very still, and then the vellum on the table by the window unfolded itself. There was no wind. It simply opened, the 3 folds lifting like something waking, and the broken green wax split cleanly down the middle, and along the ancient lines of Dog Norman a light ran from the first word to the last. And then, one by one, the letters began to go out. It made no sound at all. That was the worst of it. Hermione had braced for thunder, and there was only the quiet unwriting of 4 centuries of ink, and the small sighing collapse of the seal into dust. And then the silver on Draco's body began to move. It came away from his jaw first, retreating down the throat like frost withdrawing from glass, and where it left, the skin came back, actual living colour flooding up into flesh that had been translucent an hour before, down the collarbone, across the chest, into the shoulder, the arm, gathering, brightening, running like mercury back toward the wrist. And then the payment came due. His back arched off the bed. The stasis field flared white, and the healers moved as one, and Hermione was pulled back by the shoulders, and she fought them, and Andromeda's arms came around her from behind, and held, and for 11 minutes, 11, she counted every one. She would count them for the rest of her life. Draco Malfoy convulsed inside a cage of light, while 7 years of debt came home in a single stroke. The silver poured down his arm and out through his fingertips and burned away into nothing above his hand, a fine, bright vapour rising and vanishing in the March sunlight, and the instruments screamed, and the head healer shouted something about the heart, and Hermione stood pinned in Andromeda's grip, and could not look away, and did not look away. And then it stopped. The light went. The vapour thinned to nothing. The room fell back into ordinary morning, and Draco lay flat and grey and utterly still on the white bed, with his left arm flung out, and there was no silver on him anywhere at all. Nobody breathed. The head healer put 2 fingers to his throat and waited and waited, and Hermione heard a sound come out of her own mouth that she had never made before. and the healer looked up. "He's here," she said. "Weak and here. It's finished. It's out of him." Hermione's legs went, and Andromeda took her whole weight and lowered her into the chair by the bed, and there she stayed, holding his hand for the 11 hours it took him to come back. It was almost 11 at night when his fingers moved in hers. The ward was dark. Someone had lit a single lamp at the far end of the room. Hermione had not eaten and had not moved, and had refused 3 separate attempts to send her home. And when the hand in hers curled, she came up out of the chair so fast it went over backward. His eyes opened. For a long moment there was nothing in them but confusion. Then they found her and focused, and she watched the whole of it arrive. The room, the light, the absence. And he turned his head slowly on the pillow and looked down at his own left arm lying on the sheet, bare, pale, unmarked, except for the old faded ghost of the mark, which had nothing to do with anything anymore. He lifted it. It obeyed him. She watched the fingers open and close, once, twice, testing, and she watched his face come apart. "It's gone," he said. His voice was ruined. "Hermione, it's gone. You're—" His head came round to her, urgent, panicked. "You're free. It let you go? It's off you." "Only you," Hermione said, and she was laughing and crying at once. "Only you would wake up from that and ask about somebody else's paperwork. Answer me. It's off me. It's off both of us. There's nothing on either of us, Draco. Not a clause, not a coin, not a single thread. Croker checked it 3 times because I made him." She pressed his hand to her cheek. "We're 2 people in a room. That's all we are now. Nothing owed, nothing binding, nothing making us do anything at all." He lay looking at her for a long moment in the lamplight. And then, slowly, with enormous effort, he pushed himself up onto one elbow, and she moved to help him, and he shook his head. "Let me." And he got himself up against the pillows under his own power, and sat there, breathing hard, and reached out and took her hand in his left one. The one that worked now, the one he had not been able to close for 2 months. "Then I'm asking," he said. "Asking what?" "You said on the 27th of March that there was a question you'd ask me when it was done, and I've been unconscious for 11 hours, and I find I can't wait another minute for you to get around to it, so I'm going to be very rude and ask mine first." His hand tightened on hers. He was shaking. "Hermione Granger, I have no house. I have no family but a mother in a care ward who thinks the peacocks are still alive. I have 410 galleons a year, a rented flat in Clapham with damp in the north wall, and a window box. That's the entire estate. Everything else went into keeping you alive, and I would spend it again tomorrow. And that's not a virtue. It's just a fact about me you should have before you decide anything. There's no contract. There's no protection. If you walk out of this room tonight, there is nothing whatsoever that would bring you back, and nothing that would stop you. And I've made absolutely certain of that, because it turns out it's the only wedding gift I had left to give." His voice cracked wide open. "So, freely, with nothing making you, would you have me? Not the house, not the man who saved you. Me, the one who grows the flowers badly." Hermione stood up. She sat down on the edge of the bed and took his face in both her hands. Warm now? Warm. No cold glass under her palms anywhere. and she looked at him for a long moment in the lamplight. "You absolute idiot," she said tenderly. "I answered that on your kitchen floor in Clapham, and you were too busy dying to hear it." And she kissed him. It was nothing like the near thing in the rented flat. There was no inch held back, and nothing to misread, and no old magic listening in the corner of the room. There was only a hospital bed on the 4th floor of St. Mungo's at 11 o'clock at night, and a man who had spent 7 years not asking, and a woman who had spent 9 weeks making absolutely certain, and the space between them finally entirely gone. He made a sound against her mouth that she would remember for the rest of her life. His hand, the left one, the one that had come back to him an hour ago, came up and slid into her hair and held her there as though she were the only fixed thing in a turning world. And she felt his heart going hard beneath her palm, where it rested on his chest, over skin that was warm and whole and unmarked. And she kissed him until neither of them could see straight. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers and simply breathed for a while. "Say it again," he murmured. "The part in the flat. I want it when I'm conscious." "I love you." She said it plainly into the small warm dark between their faces. "I've loved you since a corridor in October, and I have the documentation to prove it. And if you ever again decide alone what I'm strong enough to carry, I will put you back in this bed myself." Understood. His mouth found her cheekbone, her temple, the corner of her eye where the tears were. Noted. Entered in the record. They were married the following spring in the garden of the house in Hampstead, which was hers, properly hers, the deed transferred, and the anonymous buyer's clause struck out at last by a solicitor who wept, actually wept, when Draco finally signed his own name to something. It was small. Harry stood up with her. Andromeda cried. Narcissa came from the Trelawney ward for 4 hours with a healer at her elbow, and knew her son for 3 of them, and held Hermione's hand in her thin, cold one, and said, "He told me about the peacocks, you know. He's never once told me about the house. He didn't want me to grieve it." And Hermione had said, "I know. He does that." And the 2 women had looked at each other with perfect understanding. There were hellebores in the bride's hands, 9 of them, cut that morning from a window box that had been moved, soil and all, from a damp flat in Clapham to a sunny sill in Hampstead, because he refused categorically to start a new one. And every year afterward, on the 19th of September, Hermione Granger woke to a white flower on the pillow beside her. No box now, no frost, no anonymity charm, just a hellebore laid on the sheet by a man who was usually still asleep beside it, having got up at 5 to cut it and then come back to bed. She kept them all. They sat along the kitchen windowsill in a long, unbroken row, the old ones and the new ones together, and they never died. And she stopped trying to explain that to herself somewhere around the 4th year of the marriage, because by then she understood that the flowers had never been the magic. The magic was that he had asked, and that she had been free to answer.
Thank you for staying with me until the end. I want to tell you why I wrote this story. At first, it sounds like a fairy tale, a secret admirer, flowers every year, someone who saves you from the shadows. It sounds romantic, but when I started writing it, I asked myself a hard question. What does it feel like to be saved by someone without knowing? What does it feel like to build your whole life, to be proud of it, and then find out someone's hand was under you the whole time? That is the real story here, not the magic, the fear of being carried. My favorite part is small. It is when she finds out he grows the flowers himself, badly, in a wet window box in a cheap flat at 5 in the morning. He is not a hero in that moment. He is just a tired man with a pair of scissors. And that is when she understands. You cannot be grateful to a man for that. You can only love him, or not. While I was writing, I kept thinking about one thing. Real love does not want to own you. Draco does the hardest thing of all. He sets her completely free. Free to walk away, free to say no, even when it might cost him his life. So, this is the moral. Love that traps you is not love. It is fear wearing a nice coat. Real love hands you the key and says, now choose. And it waits, because a yes only means something when no was truly possible. Thank you for listening. Take care of your heart.